Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, Rama.
Hi, I'm glad you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, Rama. Yes, we can hear you.
Am I coming across
That's-
clear to you guys? Sorry, just to check in.
That's fine. That's fine. So
Perfect.
we're starting the webinar already. So we'll hear Richard first, then there will be introductions, then I will call on the panelists. Okay. Rhonda?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you can start anytime.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar of IPBA's Next Gen and Legal Practice Committee entitled, Is It the Great Return Indeed? We're fortunate to have with us this afternoon a panel of panelists and speakers coming from various cities from Europe to Asia to down under. And so we've also been fortunate to have with us the Chief Executive Officer of the Singapore Academy of Law, and we hopefully will have a very interesting session this afternoon. But to begin with, may I call on Rhonda to call on our president, Richard, to give the opening remarks.
Yes, I will share my screen. Richard Briggs has a very nice video for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the IPBA on the IPBA webinar. The title of today's webinar is The Great Return, How Has Legal Practice Adapted and Changed due to the COVID-19 pandemic? I'm Richard Briggs, and it falls upon me to do a welcome and introduction. The Indo-Pacific Bar. I am the executive partner of Hadif and Partners and currently the president of the Indo-Pacific Bar Association since March. I'm on a 2-year term, and I've come in at a difficult time for the IPBA when the organization is trying to literally pull itself up again after the pandemic. We all worked hard, my predecessor Jack Lee particularly, to keep the organization going during the pandemic. But now, of course, it's time to both increase the membership, increase the webinars, and get people interested, not just in the IPBA, but what the IPBA has to offer. And primarily, this leads to our annual conference, which is coming up from the 7th to the 10th of March 2023 in Dubai, where we have the JW Marriott Marquis Hotel in Business Bay in Dubai already. We have a fantastic agenda. We're looking at having, if we can, 800 to 1,000 people for the conference, possibly more than that. And we're very much looking forward to it. Today is to talk about the great return, back to normal, back to legal practice. And we've got 6 speakers speaking. I won't introduce those speakers because I think we've got introductions and a moderator about to follow me. But I will introduce our introducing person, which is Valentino Lucchini from Guangzhou and GH Law in Beijing, and also our moderator, which is Americo de Guzman from Accra Law in Manila. So have a wonderful webinar. I hope everything goes well, and thank you very much for listening. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the...
Thank you. Good afternoon again. I'm glad there is interest in this particular topic from various parts of the globe and from various IPBA members. And as I've said, we're fortunate to have gathered this afternoon a list of veritable experts and speakers in their respective areas. And to introduce them, we have the international person who hails from Italy, studied in the States, but now works in China. Indeed, a very international lawyer named Valentino Lucchini. Valentino, take it away.
Thank you so much, Amerigo. Yes, I'm a victim of the globalization, let's say. So welcome, everybody. It's going to be my pleasure to introduce to you the 6 panelists and the moderator today. Let me start with Mr. James Miller. He's the managing partner of RPC, under 23 partner firm headquartered in London. While he's based predominantly in the UK, he's also qualified in Hong Kong. And prior to becoming a managing partner, Mr. Miller was specialized in insurance-related claim and property losses, particularly catastrophic weather events, and headed RPC's insurance practice for 12 years. Please welcome Mr. James. The second speaker is going to be Ms. Arya Tripathi. She's a partner at PSA, a full-service law firm headquartered in New Delhi. She specializes M&A, general corporate, technology and data protection law, and she's qualified at CIPP Asia. The next one is going to be Mr. Aaron Kamath. He's a lawyer and Nishit Desai Associate, Bangalore, India, and he's advised clients on complex cross-border transactions, including technology deals, legal and regulatory matters, privacy, data protection, cybersecurity, investment, and commercial transaction. The next one is going to be Mr. Hiroto Inoue. He's a partner on Nagashima Ono Tsunematsu, one of the largest law firms in Japan. His practice focuses on real estate related matters, including real estate funds, real estate financing, real estate securitization, and Japan real estate investment trust formations. He also has an extensive experience in joint venture M&A transaction. Please welcome Hiroto. Next speaker is going to be Ms. Anna Cho. She's associate at Dentos Kensington Swan in New Zealand. She represents clients across the construction industry, including principal, consultants, contractors, subcontractors, supplier, and insurers. Anna previously worked in Seoul, an international legal division of a multinational company, and in a large Auckland firm. She is IPBA Scholar 2019. Next one is going to be a guest star. Our Rama Tiwari is a chief executive of Singapore Academy of Law. The Singapore Academy of Law is a promotion and development agency for Singapore legal industry. The Academy serves as a knowledge hub for the legal community, providing practitioners with world-class information and insight that underpin excellence in Singapore law. Last but not least, our moderator, Amerigo de Guzman, I think everybody knows him. He's a counsel at Accra Law in the Philippines. Amerigo specializes in labor and employment law. He advises his clients on labor impact of merger acquisition, the preparation and audit of outsourcing agreements, employment preparation plans and rules, and conciliation, mediation, and arbitration of law. Thank you so much, guys, and very welcome.
Thank you, Valentino. May I now call on the first panelist to share his comments on this topic, and I call on James Miller from RPC out in London. James?
Thank you very much, Valentino and Rico. I suppose from the UK probably was the first country to totally emerge from COVID. If you were to visit London today, you would not have any idea that we have just had 2 years of COVID. There are no restrictions at all in place. Public transport is, it would be rare. I was on the train yesterday, fully packed train. It would be rare to see somebody even wearing a mask. And that is despite the fact that according to official statistics, we are still having 120,000 new cases every day. So the UK probably from about early February has been totally released from any of the restrictions. However, the effects, particularly in the way of working, continue. The UK, particularly London, has a particular set of circumstances, and I suspect that we will hear from all the panelists that wherever they're located, there are very location-specific factors in place. But one of the problems that London has is a lot of the lawyers and support staff live outside of London because London is very expensive. It is not unusual for members of my firm to do a 1.5 hour trip from home to the office and then 1.5 hours back So that's 3 hours every single day. And what we have seen is that there is a dramatic uptake of working from home. So obviously when we were all sent into lockdown, everybody had no option but to work from home. But even though, as I said at the start, there are no longer any restrictions in place at all, I pulled the stats yesterday for our London and Bristol offices. That's about 750 people in total. And we are operating on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at about 40% occupancy. Monday and Fridays are about 15 to 20%. And that compares with similar figures, which we had for various reasons just prior to the pandemic, of Monday and Friday were lower, but they were about 50%. And Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays were about 80 to 85% on average. So that has been the enormous change. What we had to do as a law firm was to decide, once we realized that we were coming out of the pandemic, what guidance we gave to our staff about returning to the office. We elected, and various law firms in the UK made different decisions, but we elected to consult with the business, and we did that with various methodologies: small groups, big groups, town halls, questionnaires, and the overriding sentiment from the workforce was that they would like to be in the office between 2 to 3 days. We had a very, very small number, so they never wanted to return to the office again. And we had a very, very small number of people who said that they wanted to come into the office 5 days a week. And that has, we took the decision that instead of mandating to the entire business, that we would leave it to the individual practice groups, which once again have their own sort of different factors. If you're doing, we have a large insurance claims practice that can operate quite well remotely. If you're doing litigation, then of course you need to actually be in the office or be in court. And so each area has made their own decision. What we have found is that whilst that has led to a very content workforce, those firms that have mandated everybody has to come into the office, say minimally 4 or 5 days a week, they have seen a significant number of resignations. People have put, particularly the associate staffs, have put that up their list of criteria when choosing a law firm to go and work at or to stay at. I know as a matter of fact, we have employed in the last 6 months at least 10 associates, all of whom have stated their reason for leaving their previous firm was because they were being told to come into the office 5 days a week. So the ability to work flexibly is now a factor of equal standing in associates' minds, along with pay and quality of work. So previously, obviously, the flexibility or otherwise was just not a factor, but that is now very, very important. As a managing partner of a law firm, obviously, my main focus is quite often on the revenue and productivity. What I can say is that whilst I'm not getting back the full 3 hours of commuting time, productivity has increased roughly by 15% across the business. So whilst people are spending more time going to the gym, spending time with their children, or whatever it is that they do at home, they are actually getting on with the work. So that previous view that when lawyers were working from home, they were actually just reading a novel or sunbathing, has proven not to be the case. And it is, they're being just as productive. My main concern is the lack of cultural cohesion and the lack of ability to discuss, spot opportunities, which comes from human interaction. But we are finding that as an office, if we have, every team has at least 2 days a week where it's strongly recommended they come into the office. There will be something to do as a team. There is often a social event, either a lunch or some sort of after work drinks or something like that. And that is proving very successful. So I think the change here are going to remain in place. I am aware that the UK is at a different stage. I recently was in the Singapore office for a week. And obviously, whilst everybody is coming back into the office, there are still considerable, particularly compared to the UK, considerable restrictions in place. But I thought perhaps as the UK, having come out of the COVID experience a little bit earlier than everybody else, might give some pointers. My personal view is that we will never, unless there's a specific client reason, we will never see lawyers back in the office 5 days a week, and that some considerable elements of their working week will be from home. I'm perfectly relaxed about that. As I say, my only concern is the perhaps loss of cultural cohesion. I think I'm finished there, Ricky. Sorry, I waffled on for a very long time, but there we go. You're on mute, Ricky.
Yes, thank you, James. I think your observations indeed fit into a global survey conducted recently by Ernst & Young that says that the general sentiment indeed of workers nowadays is for an arrangement, is for a work arrangement that gives them flexibility on when and where they perform their duties. And workers nowadays lose interest, or are losing interest, in fact, according to that study, in pre-pandemic work patterns. And so therefore, there is indeed the rise of hybrid work arrangements. And let's see if that is the same pattern evolving in India, with Arya sharing her thoughts. Arya?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Americo. And James, I agree with you completely. The flexibility in mindset is one big takeaway that at least we are following in our firm very diligently. I think agility and productivity, they go hand in hand. And now there is even more need for having a subjective approach to the very strict and very hard work norms that existed earlier on. Our decision as a firm has been to remain flexible, and that has been taken after a thorough deliberation, because we realize that some people still require some sort of structure and infrastructural aid to enhance their productivity, while some are more efficient when they're working from a home, from a work from home environment. So we decided that the optimal solution would be to have a flexible hybrid structure. But as soon as we opened our offices, we had no fixed days, and anybody could come into office if they feel like. But as soon as we opened in the month of April, which was when the third wave was ongoing, a couple of our colleagues contracted the virus, and then we immediately went back to remote working for everyone, and continued to remote work almost for the larger part of May. And I think we were able to do that because there was substantial investment that we did in keeping the remote infrastructure very much alive. We upgraded devices. We actively encourage to have meetings through virtual means and minimize travel as much as possible, because the fact that people are coming to office because they want to come to office, in any way they are exposing themselves to some degree of risk. And we want to minimize that further by not really requiring physical meetings. That's on the agility and flexibility, and that's going to stay as a strategy for the near future. The other aspect that I wanted to add is with respect to travel. There is an increasing tendency now to arrange for travel, not just domestic, but international, and it's important for business development purposes. We have had particular struggles in getting embassy appointments for business visas to travel to different countries. And despite all of that, we've seen that reasonable and viable alternatives were easily arranged for. The legal fraternity as a whole understands these restrictions. Like very recently, I was speaking at the World Technology Law Conference, and we conducted a design thinking workshop, which is not an easy format to do when you're trying to do it virtually. Thankfully, the organizers did rope in a last minute panelist as well, who was willing to conduct the workshop in person. And it took a lot of preparation versus going and attending the meeting, because we had to structure the entire format to the T. I do agree that going there in person may have had much more impact, but nonetheless, the fact that alternatives are easily now being arranged reflects just the consorted solution-based approach that everyone across the globe has. And I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Arya. So we've heard the view from New Delhi. Is it the same situation in Bangalore? Let's hear from Aaron. Aaron, take it away.
Thanks. Thank you, Americo, and hello everyone. It is very similar, but maybe I can offer a slightly different perspective. I think what especially James said at the start is very true and completely echoed. There was a survey by the Gensler Research Institute that said that less than 50% of lawyers actually want to return to office all days of the week. Majority of them prefer some days of the week, but not all of the week. So what we're essentially seeing is that lawyers do want to come back. They do want some face time and to get back to the office, but I think there's a resistance in being mandated to come 5 days a week, and we have seen that we've all as a community, as a fraternity, we've thrived through 2 years of COVID. We've had a little more control over our schedules, costs, both from a personal perspective. A lot of lawyers haven't had to relocate, saving on even rental costs in relocating, commuting costs. Firms have saved in terms of letting go of some of the office space. Newer firms have taken up shared offices, co-working spaces, essentially. So we've actually seen the benefits here, especially in India. All of these fructify, into a full, sort of booming business and legal economy that there is today. In fact, in the lawyer's profession, as all of us would agree, it's basically a hands-on 24/7 practice. So whether you're working from home, working from anywhere, you pretty much can't be off the grid. To some of our internal meetings, we had a colleague tune in from the snowy mountain caps, in the north, but very much there in the discussion, very much on point, on the legal analysis, very much involved. So we've seen that progress, and considering that nearly 60% of lawyers feel that working from home has not impacted their performance, client feedback, and this was a study done by Thomson Reuters. There is very little incentive, both from the individual side and the firm side, to go back to a fully in-person environment, right? But I think there are a few exceptions, right? Why, to some extent, a little more office interaction may actually help, right? And I actually broke this down. If I had to maybe break it down into 3 points as to why, to some extent, there needs to be more face-to-face, more in-person interaction. I think it's the mentorship. And I think more than the billable hours, more than the contracts or the calls, it's the face-to-face, the mentorship on how, especially with some of the newer professionals, we call them loosely post-COVID hires or post-COVID freshers. But I think it's very important to grow in the fraternity, build employability, competency as a lawyer, which is faster and more enhanced with face-to-face interaction. And I've been spending more time in Singapore. I just spent a month then, going back next week, and some of the Singapore law firms looking at this very very differently. They have team building exercises, where partners, they have something of a snacks break, but basically to get people together, the water cooler conversations, which go a really long way in shaping, the professionalism and broad basing that you see in a lawyer. Also, it's just the in-person interaction, I'd say, which is the second one. It's a feeling of togetherness that you actually the brainstorming. Often we get onto Zoom calls, we get onto phone calls. It's always a more focused discussion and agenda. But you'd remember that pre-COVID, most of the ideas, collaboration, thinking, brainstorming actually come from just meeting in a conference room or, just standing around and talking to each other. And that's where ideas really develop. That's a playground, an incubator for innovation and ideas. And the third, I'd probably say, is to convince people is, I think, just events. I think it's whether it's an after Friday, team session or an office outing, or even, catching a movie, again during the week, something sort of outside, but gets everyone together. That makes, especially, the integration between the juniors, the seniors, everybody in the office together, right? And boost morale, productivity, again, a feeling of togetherness. We just had an event, for instance, on our research campus outside Bombay, where we honestly had we were hesitant in maybe how many would turn up, but we had it on an interesting topic on the metaverse, and we actually had more than 100 professionals, business, technology, legal, policy, come together because there was a sense that they wanted to come together for that feeling of in-person interaction, to discuss freewheel discussions, blue sky thinking, but more importantly, just meet each other outside. And obviously a lot of the discussions happened outside the conference sessions and all of that, but that's where the real growth happens. So whilst I feel, yes, it'll never change, it may never change, to a strict model of, return to office, 5 or 6 days a week. And, we're looking at hybrid and flexi models. I think there are still some compelling reasons, to get people together, especially in our industry. Thank you, and back to you, Enrico.
Thank you, Aaron. From Bangalore, let's now proceed to Tokyo and hear Hiroto Inoue of Nagashima. Hiroto?
Hi, everyone. With regard to the situation in Japan, let me briefly explain about current COVID situation in Japan. We are finding newly infected people around 10,000 per day, so everything is quite calming down. However, maybe you know that very unique point of Japanese way to cope with COVID was that all the restrictions, most of the restrictions were only request-based. So there was no actually enforceable statute or anything like that to wear masks or take vaccine or whatever. But we still wear masks in public transportation and outside and even in meetings, and that is all voluntary. So during a more severe time, like last year, since everything was voluntary, the attendance rate or commuting rate largely differed among law firms. So some firms really thought that some points that you raised with regard to the advantage of being in the office and actually meeting face-to-face with the clients and other business people. Some firms really believe that they have to go back quickly, otherwise they would lose business in the market because there was no actually enforceable statute prohibiting them to commute. And on the other hand, like our firm, we were said to be kind of conservative. And initially, we sort of voluntarily locked down our office. And we gradually resumed commuting to office. However, even until several weeks ago, average attendance rate was something like 10%. And now we are encouraging staffs and lawyers to come to office 3 days a week. However, not everyone is following that rule. And I think that gradually we're going to go back to old normal with regard to commuting. However, now, especially as James mentioned, associates and staffs, they think that the life they actually experienced during the COVID time was quite valuable, and they think that, and they actually want to continue to the ability to work from home. So we decided to change some rules generally to introduce working from home opportunity for each of the staffs and associates. At the same time, I personally now coming to the office every business day. And the purpose of that is now we welcomed new freshman lawyers to our firm. And I think, as Aaron mentioned, mentorship is quite important for early education of junior lawyers. And what we've experienced these 2 years was that it was very difficult to take care of them and sort of support them, educate them, and assist them, because while we try to be open to any questions, the headache is that the freshmen themselves, they don't know what they do not know. So what we used to do was that just watch their back, and if they do something wrong or looks lost, then we can just reach out. But it was very difficult to do that online. And while the business itself, it was okay for especially so experienced lawyers, the mentorship or training of junior lawyers was actually very difficult. And further, kind of attachment from our side to each of the freshmen would be actually created through interaction with them. And it's kind of difficult to reach out and become friends through Teams, and we'll have the feeling that we want to actually help them. So now I gradually resume to the old normal life. And with regard to the business, I saw one thing very interesting. Now, currently, 99% of my business meetings are online, and actually web meetings are so easy to set up. And so I think I'm having more meetings than before because it's so easy to set up. And at the same time, even during these 2 years, I received some requests from the clients that they would definitely like to have face-to-face meetings. And those were kind of courtesy visit at the end of fiscal year. So that kind of just to say hello and thank you meetings, it's kind of difficult to do that online. And so probably what I see is that we're going to meet and drink or whatever face-to-face, but the business meetings will still continue to be on web meetings. That's what I see in near future. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hiroto. Let's now hear a young lawyer from Auckland, Anna. Anna, can you share your views, please?
Thank you, Enrico. Hi, everyone. So New Zealand has had quite a unique ride through the pandemic, due in part to the unique approach of the government, which was to adopt the elimination strategy and not allow any positive case in the community. So the new normal for New Zealanders was life almost as normal with very strictly closed borders. So anecdotally, a client of mine who operates globally with offices worldwide had said that in 2020, the Auckland office was the only office with people actually working from the office. Although we are not the lucky one to be able to dodge the bullet. We did let Delta into our community. So from sort of mid last year onwards, we joined the club of working remotely and working from home under very strict lockdown restrictions. So that was for an extended period of time working from home. But now that we are almost back to normal with eased restrictions since about April this year, we're also seeing that hybrid approach of people coming into the office almost 3 or 4 days a week. And even our junior staff have the flexibility to work from home if they wanted to. Now, as James mentioned, that this does raise difficulties with team building and bonding with people, because usually you would just be able to grab someone to go for a coffee, but then you realize that person's working from home that day. And one thing that our firm's done to encourage people to get together is that they would alternate. We used to have drinks every Friday after work, but because a lot of people are taking that day off, we are alternating between Friday drinks with Thursday morning tea, so that we can have some time where everyone can come and chat and actually meet people. Because I think after the lockdown since August, when we actually went into the office, including the people who have been at the firm a long time, we couldn't recognize people. There are too many new people, and it was quite overwhelming to work out who's who. So that's what our firm's trying to do, and putting back on a lot of events. We're actually also seeing events being held in hybrid format, so not just online, but also in person. So we had an event where we had speakers dialing in, just like we had speakers dialing in from Hong Kong, London, and Paris, with attendees attending from Auckland, Wellington, and also online. And this sort of model we would not have come up with it if it wasn't for COVID and the proven ability of people being able to log on and speak. Now, with all the working from home, working remotely, there's been a lot of focus on emotional well-being, with flurry of webinars and workshops to talk about how to overcome and how to look after yourself, and what to do with the Zoom fatigue from being on Zoom all day. And one thing that has stuck with me is that the Zoom fatigue comes not from speaking to people all day on Zoom, but actually from staring at yourself on the screen all the time. So if any of you can relate, you're not alone. And another story that sort of resonated with me was that a story by a lady who apologized during a board meeting for having a toddler in the room and making noise at odd hours in the meeting. And after the meeting, the CEO of the company phoned her to say that you don't need to apologize because we came into your home, not the other way around. And I was quite touched by that. Another thing that I wanted to briefly touch on was that I was working in London at the beginning of 2020 in the London Court of International Arbitration. And as a reaction to the COVID pandemic unfolding, arbitral institutions issued guidance and new rules around allowing parties to conduct hearings virtually. And now that came about as sort of a reaction to the pandemic, but some creative solutions were had by the parties. For example, holding procedural hearings virtually and then scheduling the substantive hearing until there's bit more certainty. We're also seeing parties including a clause in their arbitration agreement to provide virtual or semi-virtual hearings. And in my practice, we're certainly seeing more corporate lawyers now actively incorporating virtual hearing provisions in their dispute resolution clauses for their contracts, rather than just using their boilerplate clauses. Because even if in 5 years or 10 years time, we're not faced with a lockdown situation, now that we know Zoom hearings can be conducted, we Aucklanders, New Zealanders don't want to bother flying to New York or London to hold a hearing. This comes in hand with the push and discussion around greener arbitration, with increased use of technology and hopefully reduce costs of arbitration, particularly in relation to travel, which would require everyone involved in the arbitration to travel to a particular location. And this could be attractive to corporates with a focus on sustainability, as the increased use of technology would have the attractive byproduct of reducing carbon emissions. Another feature that we're starting to see, as Aaron mentioned, is the use of metaverse, which, as I understand it, is a virtual platform where everyone can appear as avatars. And we're already seeing conferences being held in the metaverse. For example, the Paris Arbitration Week this year hosted the first ever arbitration conference in the metaverse. So hopefully not in the not too distant future, we'll be seeing our attendees in the same conference room as avatars rather than as a list of names. One last thing that I want to highlight is that the disruption caused by the pandemic has amplified the necessity for a country like New Zealand to have good digital connectedness, and I'm keen to do my part in adapting to a world that is forever changed. Thank you. Over to you, Enrico.
Thank you, Anna. So far from our speakers we've heard from London, we gathered that most of the staff having come from commute of more than an hour would rather continue working from home for the most part, or at least maintains some flexibility on a hybrid arrangement, since they've found ways and means of being more productive, or at least as equally as productive working from home as they do work in the office, which is, I gather, the same observations in New Delhi, with Arya saying that they've found themselves to be more productive or agile, and especially with flexible hybrid work arrangements, although there is an issue with travel. I find interesting the statement of Aaron that there have in fact been people, or at least a professional, working from the snowy mountain caps. No, imagine that happening. And although, therefore, while there is indeed a preference, I gather, for hybrid work arrangements, that the driver for going back to the office sometimes is mentorship and office interaction, being some people wanting to really meet face to face. No, in Japan, I've noted Hiroto saying that while they were working from home in the past, during the 2 years, they've started working back, but that they've learned to meet online almost 99% of the time, you know? And there is a similar, I think, a similar thrust in Auckland, where professionals, law firms have started to ask their people to go back. There was Zoom fatigue, as Anna mentioned, of some sort, and there is an effort to look at other ways of reaching out and being more productive, like the use of the metaverse. No, at this point, may I ask the CEO of the Singapore Academy of Law to share with us some insights and or findings on the research and the analysis that they've done through the past several months of COVID, what their findings are, especially upon dealing with the law firms, both international and those based in Singapore. Rama, can you share with us your thoughts?
Many thanks. Thank you for having me here, and it's a great privilege to be here. I'm just sharing my screen. Mariko, you can see it?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. Okay, so I wanted to change the frame a bit because as we were learning about COVID. Equally, the academy was trying to learn what this would mean, the implications of COVID. Of course, there are certain efforts or activities we've been doing for our own members, the Singapore legal profession, but there was a concerted effort on our part to be watching out there and look at some horizon scanning work on what's going on. But before I get started, just a quick um, introduction to who we are. Our mission really is about enabling future-ready, trusted legal professionals, and we do that through our various arms, the legal thought leadership teams, technology and innovation teams. We actually run the biggest legal research platform in Singapore called LawNet, and we also publish the leading textbooks of Singapore law. Actionable learning and development, of course, strength through community. But suffice to say that, as we were staring at these trends, um, one thing really stood out. One thing really stood out for us was the acceleration of move to digital. Um, you read my background, you know I come from this background, but we knew that the penetration of digital was not very strong still. But COVID just brought about a huge change in both consumers and businesses. And I'm showing customer interactions because this is a secular trend, I feel. It started with the internet um, coming into our lives, but it's really taken off, right? And if you look at the amount of digitized transactions that people are comfortable to do today, this is important because today's customer could be a CEO of a company that we are advising, could be a director of a company advising. And customers are accelerating the adoption. The adoption accelerated by up to 4 years is what McKinsey assumed. And for businesses, the acceleration was even more stark. For Asia Pacific, the acceleration sped up by more than 10 years. All that in the last 2 years. Now, why is Rama sharing this? Because today's customers are tomorrow's client. Today's businesses are tomorrow's clients. If we are not sitting down there and thinking through this implication of the secular trend, we're going to be left behind. Yes, there is a lot of talk, and you go online and you'll see many reports about, oh, this technology adoption sped up in the legal industry. There's all this work going on. But I think we need to be thinking about our clients. How are clients changing? How are the demographics changing? That's causing a certain secular trend that will lead to our practice changing because we are there to serve them at the end of the day, right? Whether you take it as a business or you make it a calling, we are there to do that. So there's a secular trend I wanted to highlight that's really stark. And we've been watching it throughout the pandemic. Even in Singapore, we've rolled out something. We've rolled out so many digital products just in the last 2 years. Started during COVID. By November, we are rolling it out. And the speed at which, for example, we rolled out something called an academy library, because with the pandemic, you can't get to a library. You need your legal resources, you need research. How do you get all that out there very fast? And really, this digitization trend is huge, but it means that customers are getting used to this. Many of you talked about how customers are used to talking to you via Zoom rather than having a meeting. M&As, deals are being signed off with e-signature. People are used to it. You no longer have the barrier of getting the right people around the table at a certain appointment, and that's only when the deal happens, right? So things are speeding up due to technology. That has other implications on practice and burnout. I'll have to call out that. But it also means that the expectations are that it should be easy. It shouldn't be so hard. The other, and if you're sitting there doubting, the other trend here is the speed and the permanence of change I want to call out. Hence why we think this is a secular trend. Um, really, you look at how fast um, the companies adapted. Many of you talked about that agility was something that keep coming up in your discussions. But the speed at which people learned to adapt show why we evolved as a species, right? Look at the speed for on the left side, right? Increase in remote working. People thought it would take a really long time. It's done in 10 days, 10 and a half days in benchmark for businesses, right? Increasing customer demand for online purchasing. People thought will take years, was done in 22 days, right, on average. Advanced technology for operations, 30 days. The speed of adoption in our clients is increasing. So if we are here as a profession which relies on precedent, on analogy, and we are waiting for something to happen, I think the clients have a different expectation. I just wanted to call that sign out. On the right side, the largest shifts in the crisis are most likely to stick. And I just highlighted three, just three. All these sources are online. The source is there, you can Google it, it's no paywall. Changing customer needs and expectations will stick. Increase in remote working, we have all talked about it. There are law firms out there that are insisting, even in Singapore, many of y'all have visited Singapore. I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you then, but now that we have met each other, please feel free to ping me. But it's interesting. It's here to stay. You are fighting a tsunami if if anybody here thinks that the law firms cannot be hybrid anymore, right? You will have a talent problem. And the other one was increasing customer demand for online purchasing and of services. Now, you're going to say, Rama, hang on a minute. This is the legal profession. It's a legal service. It's a people business. I agree. I agree to all of those. It's just a question of how you interact. There will be always high-end, high-value services that needs a permanent touch. There will always be, I've been someone who's operated in Japan. I know there is certain visits at certain periods of time of the year that is very traditional that has to happen, right? Certain cultural traditions and norms in many parts of Asia happen. You can't get away from those. But beyond them, the expectations will be different. And today's customer in retail is tomorrow's CEO, director, or general counsel somewhere, right? And once you start to understand what is going to be permanent, then you start to understand, what kind of things we need to do to adapt. Okay, so let's move away from what the market looks at to what organizationally, some of you have talked about it in terms of culture. We found this interesting research. They really had an open research, I think about 2,000 plus people around the world. And it was interesting to see what they are finding in terms of cultural impact. We all talk about staff members having a different value set coming back. They want different things. I think this is the first time I'm actually seeing data that expresses what it means. They want purpose. They want to make a difference to what they do, right? The adaptability, some have called it resilience, some have called it agility. Well-being, I heard that earlier as well. And to make sure that people know that they're being cared for, right? The new employee experience really is moved away from performance control and hierarchy, or rather I will call it presenteeism. You're present, hence you're doing work even though you could be doing something else. Two, more people focused, more adaptable, collaborative, working together. And really these are positive changes. And if you think about it, it is actually the shared global experience, because internet and globalization came together, but the virus also globalized really fast. So we had a very shared communal global experience that many people relate to. And that leads to how is work culture. PLVs are potentially limiting values. So that's their methodology that is used by the Barrett Center. And people didn't like the bureaucracy, control, and hierarchy. You saw staff members quit or come to join your firms or other firms because of these things. But all of a sudden, there are different issues out there. What's going to happen in the world? There's a war on in Europe, never thought, imagined before. Confusion as to really what is the future. Inflation, right? Job insecurity. It's fascinating. I would have thought that in an emerging regions, job insecurity is not an issue, but it is. I do anecdotally see that. But I also see it in developed markets as well, because an inflation, a recession always causes this. Now, I have to clearly state that this is not limited to law firms, this data set. This data set is overall, okay? But even though it's overall, I think it's again, look at the way we all had a shared experience regardless where we are. I will not state that, I wouldn't go so far as to state that just because we are legal professionals, we are immune to some of these things. I think at various points and various flavors, with various differences, something or other is impacting us in this, right? Whether it's from the client-centric side, whether it's from your own family side, and hence you will then affect work. So that's, with that in the background, when Americo challenged me to come up with something, I actually was thinking and saying, instead of just sharing what we learned or what we saw or what I kept hearing, and what we were sensing, that's where I came up with that title I initially had about leveraging change to build back better. Because it's not all doom and gloom. And some of you are already sharing the steps you're taking to mitigate issues. But we should be thinking beyond mitigation. We should be really thinking about building back better. And I'm going to share some things. It's probably a summary of some of the things, but I think maybe for some, it's a validation of what's going on. I came up with a framework. I thought this would be the best way to share what we are seeing. And I tried to come up with a framework that hopefully is culturally neutral, in the sense of whether you are in East Asia or North Asia, any part of Asia or Pacific, or even one that is neutral in terms of the type of practice you may have. Hybrid, we talked about hybrid work arrangements. I have underlined writing plans and policies, and I've underlined fair. Typically, there is always, in many law firms, in many parts of the world that I've operated, I always see a culture where the fee earners are treated differently than the non-fee earners. And if we need to equalize that, because if you just treat the non-fee earners differently than fee earners, for example, non-fee earners have to come back to the office 3 days a week. Fee earners can choose. I'm taking an extreme example, of course. But that will result in attrition of your non-fee earners because they have equal aspirations. They want to be respected as well, right? They want to feel value. They want to have purpose. So I wanted to make that clear, and it must be written because then people can go back to it. In some of the regions we have discussed, the employment legislation requires it, but for some places it does not. But regardless of what the law may require, we should probably hold ourselves to a higher standard, at least in regards to our staff. Onboarding, I mean, we've talked, some people talked about new lawyers joining, freshers. I mean, this is quite an important thing, I find. We need to start with the people we bring on board, because we take some time to find, some effort to find the people we want to bring on board. And then you need to give them a great experience, because as far as I'm concerned, in my experience, they have a great experience, they will give your client a great experience, because they will be highly motivated. So you need to deal with that. And really, to me, I'll give you a simple example of what we do. We're not very big. We just make sure the manager is in the office when they come in on that day and brings them out for a meal, right? And spends half a day with them. After that, things can go online, but at least something is there. So that's onboarding. I think it's something that I didn't hear so much of, but I'm just going to call out. Retention. I think we need to ask some questions here. And I know the great resignation is happening very unevenly across the regions, across the world. You see a lot of it in the press, but really it's uneven, because the economic situations are uneven as it happens. But we should ask, are our benefits aligned with the career priorities they have? Because if they're misaligned, then getting them aligned actually will save you a lot of trouble later. Are the supervisors trained to build high-performing teams? Because it's something that happened by osmosis, but I think we need to become intentional. I mean, in that regard, we created, we got together with INSEAD and created a program for the professions. By the way, if anybody wants to come and join it, go ahead. It doesn't happen very often, but we do it to build high-performing teams. And we got the biggest number of signups for the first time. It kind of validates, you know, there's a demand out there, that you need to train people to build these things. It's no longer by osmosis. Do your staff feel valued and engaged? You need to be, bottom line to the whole training thing, I feel is becoming very, very intentional. It takes time. It's billable hours not realized. But the intangible value to the firm is much higher. And if you are intentional about it, and then you reward people who do it intentionally, by the way, it's not all about billings. And you schedule the training, schedule the mentoring, schedule the coaching, because the difference between in-person and online is you can bump into someone and it happens. Intention would then require preparation, ensuring there's a good quality of feedback or mentoring happening. And coaching and mentoring are skills. They are skills that can be picked up. Many other industries train people to do these things so that they have better managers. Because, and why do I keep talking about managers? Because I'll just say, people leave firms because of not just firm culture, it's the manager who embodies the firm culture to them. So good managers, good supervisors pay dividends. We all talked about culture in some form or the other. Was very interesting to hear all the different ideas of them. Quite sure there are a couple more. But don't let go of the innovation culture. Something that happened, everybody was, I have to say it, flying by the seat of their pants. You didn't know what change was going to come. But that created a certain culture of, we can do it, but we have to try something new. And no one had the playbook. No one knew the answer. But so what? And let's not make sure we keep that culture going. but also find the opportunities to have the social engagement, the camaraderie, the open communication. Um, Somebody mentioned movies, Thursday tea. I think these are really great examples just to bring culture and keep retaining the culture you want to have. Process. I've got a risk review here, and you're wondering, hey, we're all lawyers, we should be doing this. But I want to do just a caution check. We made many, many changes in the last 2 years. Before we get very busy again and try to answer all the client issues, the work is back, somebody better be assigned to go and check whether we left the door open somewhere. You know, a risk review is not a bad idea. It doesn't have to be done by everyone. I think you may want to set somebody aside to do it, but just go back and have a look. Um, See whether your risks are managed, because we changed a lot of processes, new tools, all that kind of stuff. Great stuff, but just do a risk review. Data benchmarking. A lot of people are using tools now. Are you collecting the right data? How long does it take you to onboard clients? Have you automated that yet? Um, is there any way you could speed that up? Because client onboarding, the faster you onboard, the faster you turn around the work, the faster you bill. And then I've got a few rates there you can look up: utilization versus realization versus collection. They seem to be fairly standard metrics, but I don't think they are measured in universal manners. Certain databases or practice management systems do provide this information, but it's something we need to look at. But benchmarking with data also allows you to figure out which work probably could provide different kind of fee arrangements versus other works that is so complex you can't estimate it properly. And that could make law firms competitive. I'm already seeing various kinds of models appearing, innovative, some of them, within the law in the different jurisdictions. But it's starting to come up. It's things debated for years, but all of a sudden people are looking at it. And something that only can really be done with data. And that's where I talk about the improvement. Once you understand your processes, once you understand the data, once you understand your risk, then do you have the right person doing it? Should a paralegal be doing something rather than, for better profitability, than a lawyer? Previously, we thought certain things a paralegal couldn't do, but you only wanted a lawyer to do. Could you delegate to a paralegal, but a lawyer signs off? So I think these conversations need to be had. And similarly, automation of tasks, as I said before. These are also interesting things to start thinking about, right? Because you want to keep the innovation culture, encourage the automation, reward the automation as well when you see it. Tools. Many people at least went on to Microsoft Teams. The usage just went up. Zoom, which was really the preserve of the geeks or the few who used to manage people. I used to manage an APAC and global team on Zoom. Suddenly became mainstream. So many people went into collaboration for the law firm, but what about collaboration with the client? Not enough yet. And if you imagine the amount of time spent updating a client or writing a mail to update them on status versus they being able to go somewhere and get it. And this is part of what I talk about. Customers expect digital service delivery. They want it when they want it, right? And having some of these kind of portals where it's not just a Dropbox for files to be shared in a secure manner, but it's also just telling them where status is, where payments are, where certain costs are. I've even got e-signatures because I realized the adoptions are uneven across the world. Some of these tools around client management to make you more productive are probably things you can think about as well. I keep talking about automation, about repetitive and low value tasks, but I want to introduce you to a phrase called no code or low code automation. These tools are tools that use if something happens, then do this, else do that, and they use English, and it's not very difficult to even code an NDA using it. I've had people, lawyers who have no background in coding, use these tools in 20 minutes, right? So to automate certain processes. So highly recommend you Google them and look up these kind of tools. And the other part is speeding up service delivery. How do you reuse the knowledge you already have? How are you tracking it? People have talked about knowledge management for a long time, but how are you really using up to speed up service delivery is what people are not talking about. They talk about reuse of knowledge, but not speeding up delivery. Because faster delivery equals faster turnaround equals faster realization and hopefully collection. And then your capacity increases to take on more work. So with that, I want to pause there and probably, I don't know, America, we have time for some questions. I'd be interested to hear from panel as well as anyone else on their thoughts on the framework to build that better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rama, for your valuable insights at this point. To enable us to give the participants more time, we can probably have a very short reaction from each of the panelists, those who might want to give their comments on Rama's presentation. First off, James, would you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean that was that was an excellent presentation, Rama. Very very helpful. I would certainly pick out as a note. I do very little legal work now. I just seem to herd cats and make sure that the firm works properly. But two things which we have done, which did show up, quite a few things that were done in haste and were not particularly advantageous, was that risk register review. Lots of things were sellotaped together to sticky plaster to get it done. And when you've got a lot of people working remotely, you better make sure that that risk is taken care of, because that is super important. And the other thing is intentional training. Most lawyers, in my experience, or partners anyway, end up being partners or lawyers because they get very overexcited about the law. And certainly here in the UK and in Hong Kong, where I'm also qualified, they don't really teach you lawyers to be business people as well and to do the coaching, the mentoring. So you have to really make that an intentional thing. Otherwise, you know, it's no longer good enough to be in a law firm and just be a really good lawyer and a lead. You know, you have to have those other skills. So fascinating and very, very nicely put in those columns. Thank you, Rama. That was very helpful.
Thank you, James. Arya, would you have any comments?
I want to pick two things. Thank you, Rama, for that brilliant presentation. But benchmarking with data, I personally think that has to be taken with a little bit of pinch of salt, because it's really data sets have multiple dimensions to it, and just blindly even relying on a set of data doesn't really work. I think there maybe I will be a little cautious in adopting it, because as I said, in our firm, like, everybody is willing to come to office for I don't know, whatever joy. Everybody wants to be in office. That may be because we are a small firm and we have that team building that continued even during the pandemic, and we really now want to be in office and working. And the other thing is on retention. I think we that is key to me. How do you retain the same talent and hire and make them part of the organization while everybody is working remotely, is something that we are very focused on. And I am glad that it features into the matrix because we did substantial investments in actually revamping our website, our brand visibility, on kind of things that we want to put out on social media, how to introduce new hires on a social media platform. A lot of thing has gone into just thinking from a retention strategy. How are we going to do our continued legal education sessions? What topics? How can we do fireside chats? All of this, we've been brainstorming a lot. So thank you, Rama.
Thank you, Arya. Aaron, do you have any comments on your end?
Sure, just two quick reactions, and it was a very insightful and extensive presentation. Thank you so much, Rama. Lots learned. One point I'd say in terms of tools, since you mentioned, I think legal tech today, we have an arsenal of legal tech available. AI, ML, document review, diligence, but I think all that is agnostic to the subject we're really talking about, and the benefits of really being face-to-face human interaction and mentorship, as you mentioned, in the legal fraternity. So I don't think one really affects the other, because first and foremost it's a people-driven industry more than a tech driven industry. Tech is only an enabler or facilitator. The second is on delivery, which you mentioned, and coincidentally, this the IPBA journal this month, the theme is D&I, diversity and inclusion. And I think one great example of actually implementing diversity and inclusion more tangibly is having different perspectives, different people closer together. That obviously helps transcend into the client experience. And we've all seen that firsthand when, being, for example, a tech lawyer, I speak to somebody who's doing tax, who obviously has a perspective on digital tax or digital assets, and that gets clubbed, and the client gets more holistic advice. And that's a great example of, more tangible, delivery to the client, and, just broader perspectives, which ultimately benefits the client. So thank you so much for that. And back to you, Americo.
Thank you, Aaron. Hiroto, your thoughts?
Okay, thank you, Rama. It was a wonderful presentation with lots of new perspective. And I was especially kind of was interested in, the partners or senior lawyers, the importance of supervisors you mentioned. So in all this, we didn't really think thoroughly about whether partners are, businessman or business person or supervisor, and we just were kind of, lawyers and gradually become partners. However, focusing on the part that we are actually supervisors and business people might be a great issue, two great issues that we have to revisit after this COVID. It was very impressive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hiroto. And any thoughts from your end, Anna?
Sure, just a quick comment on the acceleration of digitization. Thank you, Rama. That was really interesting and fascinating. The bit that resonated with my practice was the acceleration of digitization on customer interaction. So before COVID, we would be able to visit a client's site and go through their documents on site in person, whereas over lockdown, we couldn't do that. So we were fortunate to be able to use various software with the help of Dentons Global. So we've used this software called Dentons Direct, where clients can upload bulks of their documents, and we were able to successfully retrieve them. So that was just an experience that I could relate to.
Thank you, Anna. Now, before we launch formally the Q&A, I've asked Rhonda to just release a quick poll on to the participants on what they have decided so far on their arrangements. So you have it there. Indicate just for the participants to indicate, just for us to have a survey, whether they've decided going forward to go hybrid, or to really, for the most part, work in the office at least 4 days a week, or none of the above? Just for us to have an idea. So unfortunately, the panelists, I understand, and the host cannot vote, but the participants will be voting. So we have an idea of where we are insofar as the participants' decisions from various areas are concerned. At this point, I'd like to open the floor to any questions the participants might have addressed to any of the speakers or the resource speaker, if there are any. Of course, after accomplishing that poll, which the results of which Rhonda will announce later before we end. Is there any question from the floor? Or you may also use the chat to ask a question from any of the panelists, or from Rama, if you might want to ask him anything. Anyone from the participants? Okay. Any case, at this point, Rhonda, do you have the results of the poll already? So we see there are the results. Yes, indeed, as James has mentioned, and as Rama has said already, hybrid is most likely there to stay. Many of the participants saying that they've decided on hybrid. More than a majority, that is at 64%, whereas only 36% have decided to really go for the office at least 4 days a week. So it's just really a choice between going, being flexible and work hybrid, or really go for the office, try to return to the previous pre-pandemic work arrangement, I suppose. It's a 64-36 divide. So if this points us really to the lesson learned that probably everyone has learned to work from home. So at this point, if there are no further questions or comments, it's been a whole, Valentino, you have your hand raised.
Yeah,
yes.
Am I allowed to ask questions, or because I'm in the introduction?
Oh, of course, of course.
No, yeah, I have a very curious question I would like to ask the panelists, even Rama, if they have an idea if this kind of hybrid mode is somehow lowering or increasing the cost on the law firm. Because recently I was made aware of the cost my law firm is paying for doing this kind of hybrid remote working. Those kind of management software is a hell of a cost that if you work in the office, you don't have to sustain, because of course you are in the office, you stand up and go to talk to the person, right? So if you guys have an idea if whether those kind of use of technology can somehow lower the cost of legal practitioner.
Rama?
Can I answer that, Mariko?
Yes, please do.
Look, I don't think the data is in yet. I think people are still figuring it out. But what is the early signs that I see is this. I'm seeing a trade-off in cost. And the trade-off is between rental space, which is usually a very heavy amount, versus salaries, right? It's probably the second heaviest for most. Talking about Denton's Rhodike in Singapore gave up 2 floors of space, right? But their technology adoption is still there, right? So I think there is a trade-off happening. I think the dust has yet to settle, America, Valentino, because there are certain tools that are out there which are cloud enabled, and it depends how comfortable people are with their risk review and cloud. That actually democratize access to technology for many, many companies, right? We are one of them. SCL ourselves use a lot of cloud-enabled tools. So I think the jury is out. In short, But I think the technology access tools using cloud providers really democratize the access and reduce the barriers to entry. So just for example, a practice management system on the cloud costs very differently on subscription to having a server room in your own office. And then on top of that, if the server room is in a central business district, I mean, that's a whole different cost of architecture versus something on the cloud. So I think the dust is yet to settle, but I think there are movements underway that could actually change the way the P&L structure looks.
Okay, I think Arya has raised her hand. Arya, do you have a question?
No, I just wanted to tell you, and specifically, Rama, the point that you captured, having the server in your office in Central Business District versus moving to a cloud, which is what we did because everybody was moving to remote working. It's a cost that is going to be on a recurring basis. When we got our servers, we had a capex that we were writing down, right? So, I mean, it's a trade-off, but currently the initial trend that we have seen, because we have invested a lot in these areas to be fully tech-enabled, considering even encryption for emails and stuff like that. I think the initial cost is going to be a little on the higher side than working from office.
Yeah, and Arya, thank you for bringing up that great point. It's a shift from CAPEX to OPEX, right? In terms of the P&L, right? So the shock to the P&L is the CAPEX to OPEX shock. And for some countries, it's write-offs and so on and so forth with CAPEX. That you have the depreciation rights that you use it on the balance sheet. But that shift to CAPEX to OPEX is one run, but the other run is I'm going to dare to encourage everyone attending here and the panelists to consider how the subscription business model works in the tech world. Many years ago, we had the concept of retainer. Perhaps in some countries, they still exist. But the subscription model is an interesting model where it's not a retainer model, but you end up paying for services that you get. And I've been watching the legal industry and wondering why we haven't gone that way yet. Perhaps we haven't innovated yet. But this calling out, that's something to think about as well.
Good. Good. Thank you. And on that note, I think we're on the dot. And thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. We've had a full 90-minute interaction. And until our next webinar, thank you for attending. Good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye. By the way, Rhonda, just for posterity, can you take a screenshot of at least the panelists attending this session?
I will. I'll take one right now while everyone's on screen. Okay, great.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.